By the time you sit down for the AP African American Studies exam, you're not being tested on whether you recognize a source. You're being tested on whether you can interpret it. And that distinction matters because AP readers are not awarding points for identification or summary. They are trained to reward historical reasoning, your ability to take a source and explain what it reveals about a larger system, idea, or process. So even if you know the content, if you stay at the level of description, you're leaving points on the table. So in this video, I'm going to show you how to approach any source you see consistently, confidently, and in a way that aligns directly with what AP graders are actually looking for. Now, every source you'll encounter will generally fall into one of three categories: visual, textual, or data-based. But instead of treating those as separate skills, it's more useful to see them as different entry points into the same task, interpretation. And that task always moves in the same direction, from what the source shows to what the source means, to why that meaning matters in a larger historical context. So let's begin with the visual sources, because this is where I consistently see students lose points. When you encounter an image like Negro as Bello's number 2, which connects to EK 4.9 and the rise of Afrocentric aesthetics and Black identity movements, the instinct is to describe what you see. And while that might feel like a safe starting point, description by itself earns 0 points on an AP-style response. What AP readers are actually looking for is whether you can interpret the image as evidence of a broader historical development. So instead of saying this shows a Black woman with natural hair, you need to push further and explain what the image is actually doing. And in this case, Elizabeth Catlett is not simply depicting identity, she's participating in the Black is Beautiful movement, rejecting Eurocentric standards and asserting cultural and political power through visual art. And that right there, that move from observation to interpretation, is what earns the point. If this showed up in a stimulus-based question, a strong response might sound like this. The image reflects the rise of Afrocentric aesthetics during the Black Power era as artists challenged dominant beauty standards and promoted Black pride as a form of cultural resistance. Notice what this does. It names the development, explains the meaning, and connects it to a broader movement. That's exactly what AP graders are trained to reward. And that same shift from observation to interpretation carries directly into textual sources. When you encounter a document like Brown v. Board of Education tied to EK 4.7 and legal challenges to segregation, the most common mistake is still the same. Students tend to summarize. This says segregation is unconstitutional. You see, that's accurate, but it's not analysis, and it will not earn the point on its own. What AP readers are looking for is whether you can consistently explain what system is being challenged and why that matters. So a stronger response would sound like this. The decision represents a legal challenge to the system of segregation established under Plessy versus Ferguson, marking a shift towards dismantling institutionalized racial inequity in education. And if you layer in evidence, like the Clark-Dowell test, you move even to further, stronger analysis. You're showing that this wasn't just legal, it was psychological, it was social, it was political, it was revealing the broader impact of segregation. Now let's talk about avoiding versus embracing. What you want to do is avoid retelling the document. You want to avoid quoting without explanation and stopping at what it says. What you rather do, what is more important, is to embrace. You want to name the system, explaining the challenge, connecting to broader developments. You see, and once that pattern becomes clear, data sources start to feel much more manageable. When students see charts or maps, many of them freeze, not because they can't read the data, but because they don't know what to do with it. But the expectation here is exactly the same. You're being asked to interpret change over time and connect it to historical context. So if you're looking at the Great Migration chart tied to EK 3.2, just don't describe the increase of migrants. A stronger response would sound like this. The increase in migration reflects African Americans relocating to the North in response to racial violence and economic limitations in the South, demonstrating how mobility functioned as a strategy for pursuing greater autonomy, agency, and opportunity. And again, notice the pattern. You're not just describing the data, you're explaining the historical process behind it. So at this point, I want you to step back and really see what's happening across all three source types. Because whether you're looking at an image, reading a document, or analyzing a chart, the task in front of you is not actually changing. What's changing is only the form of evidence, not the skill you're being asked to demonstrate. And that's important because AP readers are not scoring you based on the type of source you're looking at. They're scoring you based on whether you can use that source as evidence to explain a broader historical idea. So in other words, the question behind every question is this: can this student take what's in front of them and connect it to a larger argument about Black history, power, resistance, or change over time? And that's why your thinking has to follow a consistent structure. Every single time, no matter what kind of source you're given. What it is, what it means, why does it matter, But let me push that just a little further, because this is where students separate into different score bands. At the basic level, students identify what the source is. The next level, students explain what it means. But at the highest level, the level AP readers are trained to reward, is when you explain why it matters in a broader historical context. And that final move, that's why it matters. And that's where most points are earned consistently. So whether you're working through multiple choice, short answer, or document-based response, you're always taking a specific piece of evidence and connecting it to a bigger story. And once that becomes automatic, you're no longer reacting to sources. You're thinking like an AP reader. So here's what I want you to do. Practice. Take any source you've studied, an image, a document, or a chart, and in 2 to 3 sentences, identify the development, the connection, and show why it matters. Because that one move, that shift into interpretation, is where you're going to earn your points. And that's the difference between a 3, 4, and a 5. Not more information, but better interpretation. I'm Dr. Kamasi Hill, and this has been A Griot's History. And until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep the story alive.